Breaking tonight, a third straight night of national protests as pressure builds on President Obama to do more about a supposed epidemic of racism in America's police departments. And wait until you hear what the Congressional Black Caucus wants the president to do now. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Right now, demonstrations in Washington, Miami, and New York, where the miracle on 34th Street became the nightmare at Macy's tonight as protesters disrupted Christmas shopping at the flagship department store in Midtown Manhattan. Watch this. This is the latest thing. Look. The protesters chanting Black Lives Matter and Die In, and then lying down in the aisles. Shutting down one of New York's most popular landmarks at the height of the holiday shopping season. At New York's Grand Central Station, commuters and holiday travelers had to deal with a holiday die-in there as well, in the middle of the iconic landmark. And as these dramatic protests gain steam, the White House comes under new pressure. The Congressional Black Caucus urging President Obama now to make alleged police racism the central tenet of his upcoming State of the Union address. And they're pushing the president to invite to that nationally televised address the families of Michael Brown, the 18-year-old killed in an encounter with a Missouri police officer, and the family of Eric Garner, the man who died after a struggle with police in New York. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is live tonight in Washington. Ed?
Well, Megyn, officials here say certainly that could be part of the president's State of the Union address, given what's going on around the country. But it's not going to be the central focus. The president wants to talk about the economy, other legacy items like immigration. And there's some history here because the Congressional Black Caucus has been a thorn in the president's side sometimes, pushing him to do more, for example, about African-American unemployment. Consistently, White House officials have said, look, the president's got to focus on the entire economy, the entire country, can't target individual sectors, individual races. President under pressure, though, from the Black Caucus repeatedly throughout his 6 years in office, and pressure today in the Oval Office when he met with King Abdullah of Jordan, wanting to talk about national security and ISIS. A reporter shouted a question about whether the president will do more than just name a task force on police reform. Will there be real action? The president ignoring that shouted question, but they know inside the White House the president it will be speaking out about this more. In fact, just in the last couple of hours, he taped an interview with BET, Black Entertainment Television, for a show called 106 in Park, and Josh Earnest, the White House spokesman, explained why the president did that. Listen.
It is an opportunity to reach an audience that obviously has been following these developments very closely and has pretty strong feelings about it. I think there are a lot of Americans who feel strongly about some of these issues, but certainly we would anticipate that the viewers of 106 in Park would have some strong feelings. A young kind of hip-hop show. You wouldn't normally see the president doing an interview there, but they realize this is an audience they need to reach out to. And they also know, when I talk to senior officials inside the White House, as they did tonight, they've got to do more than talk, do more than interviews and speeches, that there's an opportunity here for action because, as you've been noting the last few nights, there have been conservatives as well as liberals saying, particularly in the Staten Island case with Eric Garner, that there were real problems here, and the White House sees an opportunity. The president's already talked about asking Congress for tens of millions of dollars for body cameras for police all around the country. But also, we're getting word tonight that as early as next week, we'll see the Attorney General, Eric Holder, announcing some executive actions by the administration, curtailing racial profiling by federal law enforcement, FBI, and other agencies. So that's something to look for as well, Megyn.
Ed, thank you. As we look live on screen left, which is Bryant Park in Midtown Manhattan, and the folks protesting outside by the, on what's a crowded street right now with the protesters not far from the headquarters right here at Fox News. We'll continue to watch this. Joining us now, Bret Stephens, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And so, Bret, they believe this is the time for a national conversation on race and racism in our police departments. Based on what?
Yeah, I think this is a time for a national conversation about logic, Megyn. We want to have a national conversation explaining that anecdote is not data. Ferguson is not Staten Island. Narrative is not truth. And trying to jam the facts of these cases into these precast narratives about race does a disservice to the truth, it does a disservice to the communities, and it does a disservice to the conversation we're having nationally about what's going on.
If this were exclusively about excessive force and whether it was present in one or both of these cases, I don't think anybody would be pushing back. I mean, there's, at least in the Garner case, you have to question whether that was an excessive use of force against a man who was selling loose cigarettes. And I get the argument on the other side from the cops, but that's a completely fair question to ask. But how are we getting into national discussions on the racism of the police force here?
Well, if you're going to have a national conversation about race, I think you want one that is going to create consensus in this country. And Michael Brown, rest his soul, is a very poor poster child for creating that kind of consensus about how we treat each other racially in this country. I agree, the Garner case is very different. What happened in Staten Island was very different. And there is...
And he wasn't posing a threat.
Right, he was not posing an imminent threat, although, once again, New York cops make misdemeanor arrests by the tens of thousands every year, and we just happen to have seen a horrific incident take place before our eyes. 250,000
arrests last year. None resulted in the way Eric Garner's case did. I mean, that was one example.
There is one important point. When police forces, modern police forces, were set up in the early 19th century by Sir Robert Peel in Britain, one of the things he talked about was the importance of community buy-in, that the police were an outgrowth of their community, and essentially they required the willing cooperation of the public. So there's no question that people like New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, who's been doing this for a long time, by the way, other police commissioners have to be sure they're having constant conversations with community leaders. That's a valuable service.
They have been doing that here in New York. And by the way, New York City's police force is minority majority.
Right.
So, I mean, people looking at the New York City cops and saying these are a bunch of racists, well, it's majority people of color.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know who they're racist against, but they're sweeping with painting with a very broad brush. I want to ask you about the pressure on the president to now make this a central theme of his State of the Union address, the racism of our police force, and to pressure him to bring the families of Michael Brown and Eric Garner into the State of the Union as well. I mean, Michael Brown's family, this was Michael Brown's stepfather, who they were considering charging for this behavior in the wake of the grand jury decision in Ferguson. Here he is with Michael Brown's mother. Really? I mean, the father's been very measured. This is the stepfather. But are we really going to take, and Eric Garner, too, is a convicted felon in and out of jail over the past 10 years, 31 arrests. We're going to take their families into the State of the Union and hold them up.
Right. And I think that what the president could do and actually secure an important legacy in his last 2 years in office is to cool racial tempers rather than try to ignite them. Bringing Michael Brown's family, certainly if it's the stepfather, into the State of the Union sends precisely the wrong signal. But again, what the president needs to do is explain that in the overwhelming majority of cases, police do their jobs competently, professionally, and humanely.
He says that when he makes his remarks, or something like it, in a throwaway. I mean, if you read the remarks, it's all about how, you know, blacks feel underrepresented. They feel like they have racist police. They feel the divide. We need a national task force to examine it. The police have been militarized. Oh, and by the way, cops have the right to go home instead of die on the job.
I think the worst thing that can happen to black communities is not to have police forces that try to enforce the law in those communities, create a sense of order, or create a sense of civic justice. That's the real crime. Ultimately, the greatest victims or the greatest perpetrators of crimes against African Americans are other African Americans, and that's why you need the police in these communities.
What are the odds of the president in accepting this invitation to bring the families there? It's not that the families, other than the stepfather, have done anything specifically wrong, but take the case of Michael Brown. The evidence, at least some of it, shows that he was aggressing against a police officer, that he had just committed a robbery, that he committed assault against a police officer, that he was fleeing, he was resisting arrest, and then according to at least some of the witnesses, 5 African-American witnesses, he then charged a cop. I mean, how do you then turn around to the family of that man and say, welcome to the State of the Union, you stand for something I want the American people to address?
You know, I would be tempted to say the odds are low because I think it would be so politically misjudged for the president. But given the misjudgments that he's been making in the past couple of years, and I think the sense that this is a sort of a presidency increasingly untethered from reality, I feel that he might be tempted to do this. It would be unfortunate for his legacy. It would be unfortunate for the presidency, and above all, it would be unfortunate for the quality of race relations in the country.
Eric's Garner family, they came out and said, keep it calm. That's not what he would have wanted.
Right.
Violence, and it has been calm. It's been non-violent, at least the protests in the wake of the Garner grand jury decision. Brett, good to see you.
Good to see you, Megan.
Well, we are watching these protests unfold across the country tonight. Take a listen.
Because I'm at 2200.
And in the middle of all of this, New York's mayor has touched off a firestorm with what police are calling a slur against New York's finest. The city's former police commissioner is here next. Plus, dramatic fallout tonight after Rolling Stone magazine's story about a horrifying rape case at the University of Virginia appears to be full of holes, and Rolling Stone has been forced to do an about-face. We'll look at how this whole thing unfolded and who's going to pay the ultimate price when we come back.
When do we want it? Now! What do we want?